I was having a conversation this week with a client, and we were exploring about being a nice person or a lovely person or a kind person and or a horrible person or a mean person, or all these things about where this is all coming from. And essentially I was saying that a lot of how we are is from our adaptations, the nice and the lovely, as well as the horrid and mean, because they're actually coming from survival instincts and from the wound. Because if we get hurt when we're little and we have to survive, we find out that by being lovely or being nice to people, then we survive because they like that and they like that adaptation. But sometimes the opposite happens, and then you get triggered, and then you'll end up being mean or horrid or reactive. So we were kind of going over that subject, which of course there can be more extensive conversation around. But then the bit that we both said would be a good video, so here it is to think in terms of reactivity coming from the wound. So if we go back to reactivity, so the other bit I can talk about another time, about whether sometimes we're just being nice out of the wound too. But if we're talking about reactivity that then hurts other people, then it is actually that people who are hurt and wounded often hurt other people because their wound gets hit. I say hit, it gets triggered because something somebody says, or the way someone looks, or a situation that occurs triggers them, and triggers the wound. And then the protective mechanism is to spit out the pain and chuck it at somebody in anger or resentment or mean words or raised voices or horrible things being said. And that is coming out of the person's wound. So as I've explored before, essentially it's the lack of love within ourselves that creates that. So it's the lack of resolvedness, it's the place of pain that hasn't been healed, and therefore the wounded area just keeps getting hurt. But then of course when we chuck the stuff out, it doesn't clear it, it just chucks it at another person, and then a whole great spiral of pain can happen. And the chucking it can be withdrawing, of course. Chucking meanness or horribleness can be a withdrawal, sulking, all the words we might know to be stonewalling. And this goes on a lot, and therefore if we're hurt, we will tend to hurt others, or we'll hurt ourselves because we might take it in on ourselves. So every time we feel not good enough, or that we've been slighted, or someone hasn't understood us, or we react in a certain way, we can internalize again that we're not good enough, and then we can do behaviors that hurt ourselves, withdraw from people, eat too much, drink too much, harm ourselves in some way. So it still means that the hurt cycle carries on. And so essentially it is recognizing that at the core of us all, at the center of us all, we're all born of consciousness, love. We're not separate. And at the core of every single being, even people being horrible in lots of different ways, we're all born of consciousness. So we're all consciousness experiencing itself. And a lot of people aren't going to necessarily remember that, not in this lifetime anyway. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't remember it, and remember our divinity, and know ourselves, and know that the route to true ease and happiness and joy is to heal our own hurt. And so therefore it can be helpful to surrender any ideas of being a lovely person or a nice person or even a kind person or any of these, because sometimes they're just covering up. If if we're being kind because we have been told to be, or we're being nice because that will make things easier for us, or we're being lovely because that we've been found that's the way that makes life work better, then it's still going to be coming from the wound. So it sounds a bit radical, but if we surrender everything, surrender trying to be anything, and instead we just be, and we are, and we know who we are, we surrender into that essence of ourselves, and we can discover that by sitting quietly and watching, witnessing our thoughts and witnessing what's going on in our body. And we can do it by the breath, breathing in deeply, breathing out. Then there's that space. Before we breathe in again, I haven't breathed in again yet. So this space, I will breathe again. That space is the space of our truth, or pervading truth, the essence of who we truly are. So it's more important to continually be coming back to that space and to get in touch with that throughout the day, with the breath, through meditation, through witnessing and watching ourselves. Because from that place, we can start to watch our reactivity, and instead of it therefore playing out, because all of this that's playing out is still kind of playing out from the wound, instead it just becomes energy. So this is what my client and I were exploring, that when we feel a reactivity come up within us, so it could be that we feel wrong and we feel sort of mortified and upset, and our adaptation might be to really smile a lot and really make things better and really try to win someone over. If instead we clear that energy and we just see it as energy, it doesn't mean we're not going to be, would make amends or say we were sorry if somebody had told us we'd done something wrong. But if we do it from a place of ease and clarity, if we'd cleared the panic and the feeling of wrong, it's going to have a completely different quality to it. It's going to come from authenticity. So the main thing is to think in terms of the reactivity that arises in us as energy. And if we just see it as energy, and we, once we know our childhood wounds, it isn't necessarily that valid to keep going over, oh, I'm not good enough, or I'm that because, no one listened to me when I was young, and I'm like this because, I'm very sensitive to rejection because, I had a lot of rejection when I was young. Now, all those are valid. I'm totally not saying they're not important things to know about ourselves. But in the end, it's more about the energy that arises when we feel that pain of rejection, or when we feel the pain of not good enough, or when we feel we haven't been heard. There will be something that goes on in the body. And when we notice that energy rising, which is the thing we act out of, so we'll feel the feeling of despair, or whatever the feeling is when we feel we're rejected, or the sinking of our energy. When we feel that energy change, then it's important to press pause. And then there's all the space in the world, there's all the time in the world to not act out of that energy. Now, I'm not saying you will necessarily clear it all, if any of it in that moment. But just by feeling it, we can heal it. And by feeling it and not acting out of it, it starts to just be an energy, and it has less power over us, and it stops being an entity, and it stops being a thing, and it stops being an identification of, well, I'm someone who's not good enough, or always rejected, or not listened to. Instead, when it just becomes an energy, then there's the opportunity to clear it and come back to center, and come back to ease, and come back to the place of beingness. And then something else can happen. And then we start to surrender all the adaptations and identifications with the wound, because there's a huge amount of identification with our wounding without even knowing it. So therefore, if we bring it back simply to going more slowly, watching and listening, being quiet inside. I mean, we can be quiet inside, but being lively, being engaged with our friends and doing our thing, living our life. but it's a quietness inside, and it's a watching and it's a listening to what's going on within us, so that when things arise, we're aware of energy change and we're able to press that pause button and clear it. And when I say clear it, not act out of it. And if we don't act out of it, then it moves around and it transmutes, it transforms, it changes, and it doesn't get looped in the loop of being stuck with a narrative and a feeling that becomes a kind of psychological loop. And also I was saying that, my sense is that there could be that this planet is a planet of polarity. So there's always going to be these different energies all the time it is in existence. So there could be a time where in years to come, everybody's aware of this work. So therefore it's an opportunity, planet Earth, well, it is an opportunity for evolution, but people really know it, so they won't be chucking their stuff at each other. And the more people are doing this work anyway, we won't be chucking our stuff at each other. Because if we know and we're responsible for everything that arises within us, and we're available to press that pause button and not act out of it, not hurt ourselves or another, and stay still in it, then of course everybody's safe. All relationship becomes safe because everybody's aware that they're working with their own process. So the space between us comes completely safe. And it's a place where we can willingly support one another in our processes. I discovered that very much on the retreat I've just run, that the 9 who were there, my retreatees, they all support each other in their processes because that was the environment that was created. And so that is a possibility to have that globally. And if we do it individually, we make the difference. So it is that be the change you want to see in the world. And essentially that is such a simple thing, but it's very it takes commitment, because it's very common that people just act out of their pain. So it's pressing pause, it's being more still inside, being more aware, being aware of what's going on in your body, using the breath to come to that place where there's a space so that the things can be cleared through it, not acting out of it, and knowing that if the energy arises, not hurting yourself or another with it, and recognizing it can clear, and that this way we can heal the world, interaction by interaction, and moment by moment.